The clinicians who pivot successfully aren't the ones who had it all figured out. They're the ones who gave themselves permission to explore and to leap.
We're trained not just to do the work that we're trained to do, but we're trained to think. Is the training we have about how to think about and address problems. That's what we do. We're problem solvers. What have I been taught that I didn't even know I was taught? And some of it comes down to an entire coaching session. What is success to you?
Welcome to the Transforming Healthcare Coaching Podcast, where we're all about helping healthcare professionals like you create positive change at work, at home, and everywhere in between. You went into healthcare to help people, and now you're lying awake wondering if healthcare is destroying you. And the scariest part isn't thinking about leaving, it's the guilt that comes with even thinking about that question. And so today, Vicki, Landers, and I are going to talk about what to consider before you pivot so that you can make a decision from clarity and not from desperations. So stick with us. What if considering a career change doesn't mean you failed at medicine or nursing or pharmacy or any of it? What if it means you're finally paying attention to what you need right now in this particular growth journey, in this stage of life that you're in? Vicki Landers is here today with us to help us explore what a thoughtful career pivot might actually look like and why the people who plan well don't just survive that transition, they thrive. And then, Vicki, you told me something before we started recording that I think a lot of our listeners need to hear, and that is that the clinicians who pivot successfully aren't the ones who had it all figured out. They're the ones who gave themselves permission to explore and to leap. And so we're going to talk about that on our episode today. We're really excited to bring a topic that many people have been coming to talk with us about, which is how do I know when I should get a coach? And how do I know what to do in this career pivot? I know I want to change, but I don't know how to change. And so, Vicki, I'm super excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. This is something that I love to talk about, partially because I went through a number of career pivots in my lifetime, and I did so without a coach. Note to self, next time get a coach. But it's been really fascinating to sort of think back on my career and to think back about the clients that I coach who are just trying to figure out, they know they don't love where they are, but they feel so incredibly trapped and stuck and don't know what to do in order to make something better.
You know, and healthcare professionals across every single discipline, whether that's a physician or nursing, APPs, NPs, PAs, pharmacists, everyone, since the pandemic, I would say, with the great resignation, there's always been this wonder about either other ways that our careers can pivot and change. And I think what's more interesting is not only are older, middle, and younger are thinking about diversification of their career in general right from the get-go. And I would say that most of us who mentor younger clinicians do already have this is the ladder. This is what the track needs to look like. And I read a really great article, but really it's about a scaffold now. And you're going to scale that wall in life, not by a very linear path, but instead a more diversified one. And so we're going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about those types of things. So, Vicki, you specifically work with healthcare professionals that transition all the time. It's your favorite type of client to coach out of the many types of things that we can coach about. And so when someone comes to you and says, I think I need a change, what's the very first thing that you explore?
I find out why. What is it that's inside of them that makes them think that they need a change? One of the best conversations I ever had was a woman who came to me who said, I need to get a remote job. And I was like, let's talk, let's find out why you think you need a remote job. And her why was very small compared to this dramatic change that she was like, I have to quit. I have to go get a remote job. And so it's this why, what's really going on and what's really uncomfortable for you about where you currently are. Because a lot of times we're making these really big, rash decisions based upon a perception of something that's actually not as big of a deal as we think it is. So that's the first thing. It's what's really going on with you right now such that you believe you need to make a change.
Yeah, so interesting. 'Cause I think a lot of times it also relates to other parts of our lives. I think a lot of it becomes, I have no idea how I'm going to be able to take my kid to advanced sports and also deal with the rules of this organization with non-flexibility of the schedules. And they basically are told no. And so I think manager and leaders need to think about this is that every time you don't hear the whole person in your team and try to be creative to figure out as a group what the schedules might look like, as people, if you have a diverse enough team, everyone's going through something different in their life stages. And if you don't hear them, people are just going to leave simply because you just told them no one time flippantly in the hallway, you said no for the schedule and they're gone. They're already looking.
And it's fascinating, again, when I think back about my career. At one point, I was like, why would anybody ever want to work weekends? There are people who want to work weekends. There are people who want to work nights. That wasn't what I wanted. So understanding that, I think the thing is here is that everybody can have different needs and desires. And it's okay for you in your own career to say, this is what I want and this is what I need. This is what works for my family. This is the situation where I have littles at home and I don't have somebody to take care of them and I need different kinds of flexibility. And that's really important to really take a look at what's important to you. So that's another thing I get into when I'm really talking with people about careers is what do they value? Frequently what we have in healthcare careers is we have the things that we value and then we have the way that we show up and the two aren't necessarily in alignment. It's like, are you living your values? And how important is it to you to live your values? Because that will actually help a transition along the way when you start to really tie into what matters to you, because then that's the footing in which you can make all sorts of other decisions from.
Yeah. For me, like even just thinking through like what was going to be my next pivot, obviously all of you are experiencing my current next pivot, being here on the podcast and growing this coaching company. So I always began to think at some point, who am I without this role? And I got right to the core. And there were definitely times where I thought about, could I ever leave this job? And it was a resounding no. And then the question always becomes, what is releasable and what is not? And so curious, how do you help people think about how much our identity is wrapped up into our vision or current naming of what it means to be a physician or a nurse or physical therapist? Because both of us gone through transitions. We had to release some ways we thought that that's how you're supposed to show up, even though when you look at any particular profession, there's so many different ways you can operate in that job.
It's this identity thing. And I think some of it comes from our training. You're not training to be a person who does, you're training to be a physician, a physical therapist, a nurse. And it can become a limiting belief where you're trapped within a label. Because whenever we start to label something, it actually makes it smaller, it makes the container smaller. Now, for training purposes and for getting through our education, sometimes that's absolutely necessary. And once we get out into the world of our careers, that container, we can start to let go of it and think about who else we are. So, this is something that I talk to my clients about. It's like, so you are a nurse. Absolutely. Who else are you? What else are you? Because when you start to think about the breadth of what people bring and who they really are, that profession, that career track is one piece of it. And I love how you said that there are so many different ways that we can use our education. I like to think back to my interview for PT school, where Dr. Browning says to me, what else could you do as a physical therapist? And in that conversation, I had no idea. I was like, well, you practice. And then I'm like, well, I guess you could teach because there were academics in the room. But and I got stuck there. And then now, many years later, we're trained not just to do the work that we're trained to do, but we're trained to think. That's the thing I really love about people who work in healthcare is the training we have about how to think about and address problems. That's what we do. We're problem solvers. And so talking with clinicians about that, helping them see the problems that they solve and how they might use that in some other avenue besides direct patient care is also tends to be a pretty big light bulb. They are really starting to recognize that, oh, I have a skill set, and the skill set is not my identity. The skill set is the stuff I bring to the table.
I love that. This my skill set is the things I bring to the table. And so when we look at so for all the medical educators out there and the people who think about professional identity formation as something that is inherent within the training process, no matter what profession you are, the only things we tend to see in that clinical developmental years is clinician development, teaching educator development, administrative leadership, and then research. Because most of our major academic medical centers, where all of our training programs are, really only have these four flavors. And yet, the reality is, until you really get mentored or see or become friends with and see other ways in the diversity of what happens in the healthcare sector, which is so much bigger. There's industry influences, there's insurer influences, there's private, there's concierge, there's major academic centers, there's community, there's federally qualified. There's so many different types of settings that you can work in, whether it be clinical or non-clinical. The biggest thing that I think we often don't give our trainees the adequate amount of exposure is the sheer opportunity you have ahead, and that it's normal to be curious every couple of years, just be wandering around looking at what the next cool thing to do might
And
be.
there's nothing wrong with being curious. The one thing that I always like to point out is the IT perspective, and now all of the things that are happening within technology and the startups and the chief medical information officer and the people who are really helping safeguard the EMR data and to help build it. We need clinicians who have made transitions into that practice and that field to help protect the rest of us. So there's so many opportunities out there that you don't necessarily know about until you start to look.
And I think the greatest fear I always have, just like you always ask a lot of why questions and try to really dig deeper for the true underpinnings, either the finances or the values or the boredom. If those are the things that are really driving this desire for change, we always want to make sure that we're not running away from a situation in a toxic work environment that could be potentially fixed versus running towards you're actually interested in the thing that you want to do, because that's going to propel you like gasoline as compared to when you leave on sort of bad terms or a sour relationship or irritation at the organization, that doesn't help anyone, because not only does word get out, the reality is you, more importantly, you don't feel good about that kind of transition.
And you're not running towards something. I love that running from versus running to. When we're running from something, we have no idea where we're going. It's like we're running in the dark. So you have no idea if what you're going to is going to be any better because you haven't really identified what you're leaving so that you can pick something better that suits you better. So understanding what's the challenge where you are, because you're right, many times you can contribute to the improvement of the place where you are just by how you're showing up. That, of course, brings us back to the thing that I always like to talk about is what lens are you wearing? And really understanding if your environment that you're not happy in is really the environment, or maybe it's something that you've got going on that's not lining up with your environment. And that if you change your lens, maybe this really is the right environment for you. You just need to make a little bit of a shift to make it more satisfying.
That's a hard piece of advice for people to take in, because I think a lot of times most people are like, it's not my problem, they are the problem. But just like the Taylor Swift song, at the end of the day, a lot of times it is us, because right now we've either outgrown the space or we haven't found the next thing, we haven't fallen in love with the next problem. And so I think the other thing we do often get is from our partners and our spouses who are used to the comfort or the way things were. People say things like, well, isn't that just a waste of your training? You're not going to be a doctor anymore? What? So, how do you help your clients when they get this kind of external non support, when they themselves internally are doing the work, working with you to figure out their values, have identified that I have something completely exciting to move towards, and I'm totally willing to put in the time and energy to get advanced degrees, do whatever it takes to transition and change what that percentage is or completely leap? How do you help clients with that kind of negative influence around you?
The first thing that you touched on is this sunk cost fallacy, where I've done all of this stuff, therefore I should keep doing it. And I think that's a really interesting thing to address because the first thing is, well, what did you gain from all of this that you had? And then the next question is, what are you giving up by staying in this place that doesn't make you happy, that just because you believe that you should? And so, really, there's a lot of discussion that can happen there. And I use this thing called the pain gain model. It's kind of like a pro con list, but it's a little different than that, where it's really about, am I going to stay or am I going to go? And really understanding the benefits of the go versus the detriments of the stay. And it can end up being a pretty robust conversation with a partnership. So your partner may be used to saying, I'm married to A. And so that's part of their identity. And so that can be a pretty robust conversation. And that can also be addressed in a group conversation. thinking about with regard to the relationship what's important. Because as I think we've touched on this briefly, which is financially, making a pivot generally results in a decreased income for a little while. Not always, but it's just making sure that everybody's walking into it eyes wide open so that they're really having those conversations. Because it's not that I would ever want somebody to do something on their own without having the support of the people in their lives, because the people in their lives are their lifeline. They're the ones who keep them going. And so it needs to be an all-inclusive conversation. And sometimes it's my values are that I want to support my family. So I am going to stay put. And then at a later date, I'm going to run to something else. But right now, my value of financial stability, it may be that I'm going to stay here. And whatever people decide, it's right for them. I just want people to have really looked at the whole picture so that they're making a choice to either stay or to pivot into some other avenue consciously, instead of just stomping their feet and being, I'm unhappy where I am.
It's funny because whenever people say, "Isn't that just a waste of your training?" It's like, no, not really, because if you ask any physician CEO right now of any large healthcare system, they introduce themselves first as I'm a physician or I'm a cardiologist or I'm a surgeon. You don't stop being those other things, even if you no longer clinically practice. So, for example, even for myself, I still identify with much of emergency medicine and that I'm a critical care physician and an emergency physician, even though I'm still board certified, but I don't practice clinically anymore. And I don't think it doesn't get rid of your identity of that's who you have been. It just you add on more identities, if anything, and just layers the complexity.
You have the skill set, you have the skills that it was required to get to that position to be the ED physician. You have the skills that allowed you to get there. And those skills will serve you in other ways. So any sort of educational growth, I don't ever believe is any kind of a loss ever. It's kind of a personal belief of my own.
And especially with leadership. I think as we provide leadership coaching for organizations and teams, the fact that we all come from a clinical frontline perspective first for many years before pivoting into this leadership coaching perspective allows us to remind ourselves that we are deeply involved in the front lines, because that's half of leadership really is never forgetting where we have come from. And so all those experiences do matter.
Remembering why we got into healthcare in the first place, because we can help patients one at a time, or we can help create an environment for people who are caring for the people. And all of it is about creating better quality healthcare.
Right. So I guess what I'm wondering too now, a lot of times the second thing that people start to like dig a little hole for themselves and end up finding a coach is because they are very stressed out about the finances. And so I will have to admit, clinical practice is extremely lucrative for majority of us compared to non-clinical positions. So I'm curious, how do you help people think through the financial things? Because that often boxes them. They actually feel like I can't give up this because I've been told the rules of engagement are if I give up this and I can't do this, then I only am eligible for this. And that financially it doesn't make any sense for them.
Obviously, we've already talked about values and what's important. But one of the questions I tend to ask just to get a really good picture is they're accumulating funds and they're accumulating money. And are they getting the opportunity to use it in the way that they hope? Or are they just working for the bigger bank account? And sometimes the answer is I'm working for the bigger bank account so that I can XYZ. And sometimes it's an epiphany of I probably don't need that because I'm not even using it. And so it's being willing to be honest with themselves and the situation. I think a lot of times, and I've actually talked to some financial planners about this, a lot of times clinicians don't necessarily think about money in a way that is in their biggest benefit. And so you really just have to take an honest look about what's coming in, where is it going? Are there other investment opportunities? Are there other things that could be done that would allow you to still have the same lifestyle, to still have the money for the kids' college, but where you could pivot into something that feeds your soul a little bit better? I highly encourage people to actually talk to a financial planner and don't think they can do that themselves, because they will find that there's more than they think there is. And that's going to give them this level of comfort and freedom.
Yeah. So I think in the financial world, there's certainly financial planners, which is the execution side. But even before that, there's coaches, financial coaches who really think about how are we aligning the values and looking at the pie about the savings and the spending, because there is a phenomenon people often attribute to golden handcuffs, where we basically have to keep working to maintain the same lifestyle. And I think the question always becomes when we push people to ask, well, do you need that house? Do you really want that house? Because the reality is, for many of us, people start to realize I actually don't want to maintain a huge 5-acre property after a while. And so many people downsize. And so the question is, why do you have to wait until a certain retirement age or income or asset allocation before you start thinking that way? And also thinking about what your legacy is. For some people, estate planning is important. And for some people, it's less important. And so I think understanding the values and how those things you've been mistaught culturally, a lot of financial education and alignment before even the financial planner is something to think about to really have a safe place to just start to talk and learn.
Yeah, I think you bring up a point of the stuff that we've been taught and starting just to look at it with curiosity. What have I been taught that I didn't even know I was taught? And some of it comes down to an entire coaching session. What is success to you? There are generally held beliefs about success, at least here in the US, that tend to be very tied to money. But when we really dissect it for ourselves, that will actually make a really big difference about deciding what we want to do with the rest of our careers.
Yeah. I think it's funny because we are given such pretty generic, the same kind of advice as we enter into training. And then many financial planners do also give sort of the same advice in terms of how much you should save and how much rental versus income you should be having. And at the same time, the reality is you know yourself the best. And I think the other question too is there's certain things that you've always held. For some people, they are related to things. And so some people really like certain things, whether that be travel, which is very expensive, or vehicles, which are also very expensive. And so I think you have to decide like certain things are more important to me than others. And everyone's allowed to spend their money the way they want to spend it, no judgment. And so you have to decide if you spend in certain categories, then you skimp in others. And that's also okay. And that there isn't really a one size fit all.
Again, it's just doing it by intention. Like if that car is the thing, then by golly, let that car be the thing and do it on purpose. And don't begrudge the car for being your thing. It's just helping people see, goes back to the values and what's important and are they living in alignment with what's important to them? Because when you start to actually live in alignment with the things that you value, life satisfaction, it turns around completely. And it's really fun to watch people have that when they realize what's important to them and they start to make a shift to doing that. And it's a fun thing to watch. And honestly, from my own experience, it's a great place to be.
I also would say reality is for most people, at the end of the day, it is going to be the relationships. It's the relationships and the memories, and it is really not about any of the things that we have acquired. And so just recognizing that, I think everyone has different taste points and what's considered okay. But most people, if we were to die tomorrow, what's most important is the time spent on relationships, time having the ability and the freedom to be able to spend that time with the people that we love is probably the greatest driving force for many people's career switches because the rigidity and the flexibilities of managers with the different work groups and unwillingness to think outside the box or hire enough part-time people and the restrictions within specific groups means if there's less freedom, then people will go find the freedom. And so that's something to think about if you're a leader listening to this is that are you just enabling what the problem has been, which is that people are going to leave for certain values that universally people do want, which is stability, ability to make their own decisions, autonomy, some freedom.
Yeah. Freedom and flexibility. Many people, that's why we go higher education. That's why we get more knowledge because we want to be able to use it in a meaningful way. But we also want to be able to have the flexibility in our lives to chase what is meaningful to us. Whether it is more family relationships, more travel. You
This also affects the people that are around us, so our colleagues, our partners. And so thinking through our social identity with our groups, when you decide to stay or go or be a hybrid kind of person, what kinds of things have come up in your coaching relationships where your clients have said, I made the decision. I've done the thing. Financially, I'm good. But now it's more like I'm getting flack from in all ways or very strange new relationships that I didn't expect in terms of what this means from a personal perspective.
So it's you're doing what? Those kinds of questions. And so much of it is because the other people have not ever explored this kind of thing and they're trapped in the thinking of this is the ladder versus the scaffold. I've had people treat this as a game and be like, yes, I'm playing a new game now and I'm going to go try this because I did this game and I was winning at this game. I'm bored with winning at this game. So I want to go play a new game. The people that you quote leave behind, sometimes they get angry, sometimes they're upset, and mostly it's from a sense of loss because they were comfortable with you in that particular role. And sometimes it's challenging because you do lose relationships as you move on. And sometimes it's just because you're not in the same work group and you really enjoyed working with somebody, but you're doing this. And so there is a little bit of grief involved, and that's perfectly normal. There are things that are going to change. Yeah, I just think the human brain is so funny because we desperately don't want to change in spite of the fact that everything always changes. And it's helping the person who's changing walk through some of that grief because you do have a grief of a change in identity and recognizing that that's okay and that the people around you, some of you will support it and some of them will have a harder time with it. And that's if we can give them grace because they're also grieving. That's kind of a helpful way that people have to look at it.
I love that. And one of those things that sort of takes you by surprise, this last piece, because when you think you've already worked so hard to make the decisions, you're halfway and you're different now. And it's sometimes very interesting to look back on time, right? So, if anything, for me, I hid that I had gone to coaching school and started this company and done any of this. And even now, I'm telling people, oh, did you know? So I'm still telling people now, what, 3 years later, hey, did you know I have a podcast? So it's funny, in the beginning, part of me just didn't wanna rock the boat and enter into this world of what you're describing. I didn't wanna deal with other people's emotions, and I personally also wasn't confident myself either. I had just started, I'm just dabbling, I don't know what I'm doing, but now 3 years later, it's like, oh, it's much easier just to tell people, like, this is what it is, and the bravery is easier because the identity now is more fully formed just from being in another world. And I think what's also interesting about it is that you then now appreciate, with more perspective and more experiences that are only in your clinical work group, you start to appreciate, I actually appreciate a lot more now. You appreciate, like, I wonder how they decide whenever there's like a winter storm, how the facilities people actually make the contingency plan and how do you do the emergency planning and who's the IT for this? And so you start to wonder about the many more things when you look outside yourself simply because of having with the coaching, you meet many more people who influence the leadership of large healthcare organizations. And if you can't see holographically the world of that we're living in, you then appreciate also when you're just working your shift and it's fine and life goes pretty well. It's a very wonderful thing. And back in the day, you had no idea.
You had no idea what all went into play to actually make your shift happen and to have everything that you needed present there when you needed it. One of the things that I love the most about shifting away from being employed by a healthcare system to being a coach for people who work in a healthcare system is the people that I have met that I never would have met and the things that I understand about the coaching world and about the speaking world and about the book writing world and about all of these other worlds, people that had nothing to do with healthcare who are brilliant and amazing that I never would have come across had I just stayed within that world of working for a health system. And I'm really blessed that I'm still connected to a health system, but I'm also seeing other industries and the way that other industries work. It's so much fun.
Yeah. So I think if we had to sort of bucket like the possibilities is healthcare professionals have an opportunity within healthcare, either a new specialty or leadership or some other role that's non-clinical. So you have something within the healthcare. You can be something adjacent to healthcare, which is like tech, pharma, consulting, coaching. And then you have completely outside the healthcare industry completely. So if you had to bucket those three, what's your framework for how you help people think through what's lighting up their passion?
So, what I do with my clients is I have this thing called LEAP. And the first thing we look at is what brought you here to me and what brought you here in your career. So what is all of the stuff that has tied you together that like landed you in this spot? Then we explore, what is it that you want? What is important to you? What is your value? And this can take a number of sessions to really get through. What do you want in your personal life? What do you want in your professional life? What do you want in your spiritual life? Just like, what is it all that you really want? And then we help forge a new path. What's the path that's going to take that person to where they want to go? Because you can't get where you're going if you don't know where it is. Again, that's going to, we're not running from, we are running to. And then we spend some time really figuring out how can that be accomplished? We've got this new path. What's going to get in our way? What is in our way? Is it mindset? Is it support? Is it finances? And problem solving, all of those things. And then at that point, people are really taking off into their new pathway. And it's fun. And they're usually very excited about whatever choice they've made. Sometimes that choice is to stay put and to just do more clinically or just to speak up more in meetings. But it's the evaluated choice that really seems to make the difference.
Right. And so I know another question that many people ask is, well, how long should this take? Or when I look back in our transitions, I mean, it wasn't fast. It wasn't like one day. So I'm curious, what would you tell a random person on the street, like how long it takes for you to begin a transition process to do it the right way?
I hate this answer. Okay. Hate this answer. The answer is, well, it depends. If you are somebody who likes to move quickly and you like to think this through and you are like really in a hurry, 6 months. If you're somebody who's really discovered that I need to get some education, I need to go get a certification, I need to start learning AI, it can take a little bit longer. But the biggest thing is getting started, because when you get started, then you can start to forge your own path. And if you're like, I got to get this change done by the end of 2026, great, we can figure that out. Or this change is really about my retirement and I am just trying to figure out how to position myself now for the best thing then. Generally, there's a little bit longer runway for that. Unless, of course, you're 70.
Yeah. I always tell my clients to embrace the both for now. Like you can be doing both things. You can be moving towards the new identity and not giving up your old one and let it be a gradual transition. There is a graph in terms of people's functional decline and as you get older and then like what else like is important. And so when you think about as you age, it's no different that you're going to slowly release things you had to do and begin to take on new things and that every transition isn't going to be an on off switch. You don't have to make it that way. Because I think even for many of us, we have portfolios, we have things that we have nurtured and tended to for like 10 years of our career. To just suddenly give it up doesn't make any sense. There's a way to sort of fade out and have both realities at the same time.
Yeah, both and is an absolute possibility. And sometimes people get into the black or white thinking, right or wrong thinking. And if we can release that, then you can start to see the possibilities of, oh, I could do this and this right now. And we can go through these transitions. And the transition itself may be interesting and challenging. But if you don't even consider that you can do it that way, then that's limiting. And there are just so many options in the world if we just take some moments to look at them.
Great. So to recap, would you mind just re-explaining again your LEAP format for how you help clients through this? And we'll come to a close for our session.
So, LEAP is learn what brought you here, what brought you to this space and this time in your career, who you are, how you got here, and what brought you to me, the coach. So, what's that nugget of discomfort that propelled you to take some action? And then we explore what you want next. What do you want your life to look like? And aligned with values, aligned with purpose, aligned with your day to day activities. How do you want that to really look? And then we adopt this new pathway. We figure out what the pathway we really want it to look like. And then we start to execute it and move forwards on that path, knowing that nothing is ever going to be smooth. There's always going to be bumps in the road. But if we know the path that we're on and we know where we're going, we can take the little detours along the way if we need to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, in this episode, we explored the identities, the practicalities, the effects in our relationships, and how to take action on doing that transition as you find more normal growth opportunities in your career as a healthcare professionals. And so, if this episode gives you even a sliver of permission to explore what else is out there, I want you to do two things. First, Text this episode to your colleague or your mentor, because a lot of times we have trusted advisors in our board of directors who would be nice to get some advice from, because sometimes you'd be surprised. They actually have other people who you can talk to begin to think about what transitions. And then two, if you want support with that, contact us at hello@transforminghealthcarecoaching.com. Book a call with Vicki and figure out whether she might be the right person for thinking through your career transition. So we are so happy that you listened. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends, colleagues, mentors, advisors, leadership, because we know that our development is really not in a vacuum. It's going to be with all the diversity of people who are out there to get you the opportunities, the sponsorship, the advice, and we're just one part of that story. Thanks so much for listening. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and share with a colleague who would benefit. Together, we can transform healthcare one person at a time. Find us anywhere you find your podcasts. Ready to take your healthcare leadership journey to the next level? Book a discovery call, free, at transforminghealthcarecoaching.com to explore our personalized coaching packages designed specifically for healthcare professionals like you.